Hi, Alexandria. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are just thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for hosting me. I'm pumped to be here with you.
Yes, absolutely. And before we start chit-chatting about the importance of pre-pregnancy wellness, we'd love to learn more about you. So please tell us about yourself, your background, and how you ended up where you are today.
You got it. So I started my career on the corporate side. I did investment banking to start, and what feels like a very different chapter, and then was a consultant for many years, working largely in the healthcare space. So I worked with pharmaceutical companies, med device companies, and that was when I learned the beautiful intricacies of the healthcare landscape.
Oh
And
no.
yes, yes, it was wonderful. I mean, I think healthcare is just such a cool space for the level of impact that it has the potential to have. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to switch from what I felt was a more reactive model of healthcare to a more proactive one. So that was the impetus to go back to school. I went to Harvard and did my MBA, and then I did a part-time master's in nutrition on the side in an effort to add more tools to my toolkit.
No big deal.
And right, not the most usual path. And then, I finished both of those master's degrees, and that's when I made the decision to leave the corporate world and move into the clinical setting, started working with one-on-one clients, did my training in functional medicine. And the next part was the part that I didn't quite see coming, which was the part where I ended up having a lot of clients and friends who were coming to me struggling to conceive.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was tough. And people were coming to me asking for my advice and guidance after they had been struggling for some time, almost as a last resort. Do you as a nutritionist have any thoughts for me? I'm willing to try anything, and at the time I was so struck by this. And so I started diving into the clinical literature because I didn't have any ready answers. I was like, stay tuned, let me check into it. And so, I did one of the things I do best, which is research. And I looked at a lot of the clinical literature. And, as I said, I was doing my functional medicine training. So then I started running these really broad panels of tests on my clients. And a whole bunch of stuff started flagging that their providers had never even looked at in the first place.
Wow.
And yes. And once we were able to resolve most of those things, usually through diet and lifestyle and supplementation, sometimes medications and procedures in collaboration with their doctor, they were able to get pregnant, either naturally or on the next round of assisted reproductive tech. And that was the moment when I was wondering to myself, why are we waiting? Why are we having people go through years and years and years of fertility treatments that are often invasive and expensive and emotionally and physically exhausting without doing baseline investigation of what is going on? And I got pretty activated by that. And so that was the impetus to start building a business around pre-pregnancy wellness testing. And then, I started, asking this question more of, what would it look like to change this dialogue and start doing the screening up front. And that was ultimately the impetus to write a book about it and to really rewrite the dialogue around preconception, which is all the things that we could do to prepare to get pregnant. So that's my story.
Wow. And what a story, Alexandria. Oh my gosh. And I feel like every professional that I talk to, they're like, if you're pregnant, you just find out you're pregnant and you're trying to prepare, for this life and your pregnancy and doing everything right. What if you had just worked out or eaten a little bit better or done all of that stuff during pre-pregnancy and prepared your body rather than try to get healthy while you're pregnant? And so everything you're saying just makes so much sense. And I love that we're having this conversation because hopefully for people out there who are interested in starting a family or having another child, having these things in mind can be a game changer. And what was it? What was the moment that you just realized, wow, this is what I'm passionate about, like the fertility and preconception health? Like, what was it?
Well, I think it was seeing the disconnect and seeing a path for how to address the disconnect. And I kept telling myself, someone is going to figure this out. Someone is going to do something about this. And I, at some point, after saying that for a while, realized, oh no, that's that someone is me, right?
That little voice in my head. Oh, that's telling me that I'm that someone.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was so obvious to me that this was, one of the paths, and I just kept seeing this just it was gut wrenching to watch friends, gut wrenching to watch clients. I mean, they were just so heartbroken and so confused, willing to do anything, willing to pay anything, and nobody was able to help them. And this was, almost a decade ago at this point. So I think the resources in the landscape are different than they were even back then. But I just couldn't watch it anymore. I was very, very incensed with the advice that was being given, and a lot of times just callousness of the care and sloppiness of the care. And so at some point I just decided, okay, I will, build something that's, will take one piece of this journey and at least give people more agency over the process. Does it solve every problem? No, but it gives people an option to do something rather than just sitting on their hands or, twirling around, which is not super helpful.
And you say the callousness and the carelessness. Why do you think we were at that point? Why are we there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's multifactorial, as always, I think with a lot of these issues. But what I've found is that I think in general, the healthcare system is not designed for issues like this. And if we really think about it, this is not only, a problem, it's a new problem, meaning our grandparents and great grandparents did not experience the same epidemic of infertility that we are experiencing today.
Yeah, they're having 10 kids, and we're praying for 1 or 2. Yeah.
Right. And so our environment has changed more in the last 50 or so years than it has in the last probably couple thousands of years. Yeah. And so we're seeing the repercussions of that on our reproductive systems. Our reproductive systems are the canary in the coal mine. And, the way that I talk about it is our bodies were designed to conceive, but our modern environment was not. Right. And so if we think about that, our traditional healthcare system is phenomenal when it comes to acute care. And when we're dealing with any problem whose solution is medications or procedures, right? Those are the tools in the toolkit. And so if there's a medication or a procedure for the problem, it's great to go down that path, right? Yeah. If there is not, right, or if those solutions are insufficient, which is what we're often seeing, then we have to wonder, okay, well, what other solutions are out there? And so I think it's just, even if healthcare providers, traditional doctors who are practicing traditional medicine wanted to help, a lot of times these tools aren't even in their toolkit. They're not being trained in nutrition. They're not being trained in a lot of these integrative modalities, and they're not being given a lot of time to even spend with their patients. So their hands are tied, and insurance is driving care. Care is not driving insurance. So there's a lot of structural barriers on the provider side who, where even if they wanted to help, they often aren't able to in the way that they'd like to.
And that's why collaborative care is just so essential. We shouldn't expect doctors to know everything and be the experts in everything, but when they're seeing an issue, collaborating with someone who can help with these issues rather than just resorting to, a pill or whatever. And so that's why we're excited to talk to you about this. But can you explain to us, Alexandria, what pre-pregnancy wellness entails and why it's important for prospective parents?
Oh, yes, I can. This is one of my favorite topics. So pre-pregnancy wellness is essentially the state of your health roughly 1 year prior to conceiving that impacts your ability to conceive and the health of a future pregnancy and baby for both reproductive partners. So I am not just talking about the female reproductive partner. And the reason that pre-pregnancy wellness matters is for 2 reasons that I just alluded to. But number 1 is that it makes it easier to get pregnant. And number 2, it increases the likelihood of having a healthy pregnancy and baby. And so, I think we've oftentimes in women's healthcare in general talked about 2 periods. It's like we're focused on contraception, so preventing pregnancy, and then we're focused on pregnancy, so managing, right? What about that intervening period? We've kind of forgotten about it. And so preconception is that intervening period of time, and I think it deserves a discussion unto itself. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that some of the data is suggesting that we have made all of the strides that we can make. This is what it suggests in the prenatal period. And that if we want to start to see even better outcomes, we have to move earlier in the life cycle to the health of both parents prior to conception, right? And so to the point that you were making, right, if you're dealing with someone who has diabetes or has hypertension, right, trying to deal with that in pregnancy is very challenging, not only because you have to deal with those lifestyle changes, they take a while, your cells take a while to actually assimilate all the changes that you're making, not to mention the fact that you have a couple other things probably on your mind in that period of time. So it just makes it much harder versus if we try to address these things in the preconception period without the same level of pressure oftentimes.
It's so true. Oh my goodness. And because it's really true. For some reason, women, and I don't want to generalize, but at least for me and my friends and community that I talk to, we are taught like, do not get pregnant until you're ready to get pregnant. And so you are on birth control or usually birth control. Family planning is very rarely used. So as soon as we get off birth control, we expect, oh, I can get pregnant. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen immediately. And for some people, it does. And that is amazing and
Yes.
beautiful and
Wonderful.
wonderful. And I'm so happy for you. And then for others, it's not. And it's a long, arduous road of just, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And having these conversations beforehand, before you're actually ready to get pregnant, listening to this podcast and listening what you have to say, Alexandria, I think can make such an impact. So we can make these changes before we get to that point. So thank you for telling us a lot more about this pre-pregnancy like health importance. How can pre-pregnancy wellness be measured?
Mm. Well, I mean, we're charting new territory here, right? Because I think the way we historically think about things related to fertility is often a below the waist conversation, right?
Right.
It's your reproductive organs and maybe let's throw in some hormones. And
Yeah.
right, all true, right? It does. Fertility does involve your reproductive organs and your hormones, but that's not all, right? Fertility is an extension of our overall health. And if we myopically just look at our sex hormones, we are missing huge pieces of the puzzle, right? So the way that we're looking at it is pre-pregnancy wellness has 5 different categories. So we look at blood status, hormone status, metabolic status, nutrient status, and immune status. And all of those things are the things that I saw when I was looking at the clinical literature can have an impact. These are all the things that could be red flags or yellow flags that could interfere with someone's ability to get pregnant and sustain that pregnancy. And also many of these things affect the pregnancy period and postpartum period as well, which I'm sure is very familiar to you and your audience, right? These all have knock-on effects. So looking at pre-pregnancy wellness in a much more holistic way allows us to actually understand, okay, what might be potential barriers to conception and the health of a future pregnancy? And can I get ahead of those? Can I start to address those early rather than waiting until they manifest?
Yes. Oh, wow. Yeah. And I guess I think that there's a lot of misconceptions when people start thinking about all of this. So what do you believe are some common misconceptions about pre-pregnancy health and its importance?
Yeah, so I'll talk about 2. I'm just taking some notes because I don't want to forget. But I think so. The first one is a lot of times people will say, like, is this really necessary? Right? Like,
Yes.
Is it really necessary to do preparation, or is it really necessary to do testing? And I'll say a couple of things. The most unfortunate of the things I will say is oftentimes you will not know until it's too late. And I hate that that is a reality, but that is part of the truth is sometimes we don't know until we are dealing with a situation on the back end. And related to that is the majority of individuals with abnormal preconception labs oftentimes have no symptoms. Or they believe the symptoms that they have are normal. I should put that caveat in there as well, right? So a lot of times we wait, if we look at the disease process, we wait until we have symptoms to go see our doctor. But if we actually look at the disease process, symptoms occur really late in the disease process. And so if we're waiting until we feel something, experience something, that doesn't mean we aren't experiencing physiological changes. And those physiological changes, meaning in your blood, in your organs potentially, that those things can affect egg quality and sperm quality, endometrial receptivity, all of these things that when we think about getting pregnant are really important. So I think, I feel fine, and I'm putting that in air quotes, is a lot of times what I hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe that is true. Like we see that on your test results. Oftentimes that is not the case. And I think in general, unfortunately, we have been taught to numb our body's symptoms. So our body may be giving us symptoms that we may not even be able to hear because we're so busy, or we've been taught to just assume it's normal.
Right. Oh gosh. And that's so true. I really do believe that people pretty much in a lot of facets of life, they're like, is this really necessary? And I'm like, well, it depends. How important is this to you at the end of the day? Because if it's not that important, then if we come to that roadblock, it's maybe not that important. But if it is that important to become a parent one day, maybe taking it a little bit more seriously and considering, all right, what should I maybe think about before I remove the goalie?
Mm.
You know? Okay, and you said number 2. You said there were 2 things, so go for
Oh
it.
yes, this one's a juicy one. So I think one of the bigger misconceptions in this category in general is that age is the biggest predictor of fertility.
Yeah, yes.
And I just see so many females torturing themselves over this. And we have, just scared a whole generation of females around their fertility. And I understand it. And I understand the sentiment behind trying to get people to think proactively. But the data does not support a lot of what we've been told. And so I just really want to invite people into a different framework, which is that age does matter, but it is not the only factor. And it is not as big of a factor as we've been led to believe. And more than likely, the older you are, the more your health matters. And that is the variable that we can modify. And so when we think about it, oftentimes people are confusing chronological age with biological age. In medical care, we treat all 30-year-olds as equal, all 35-year-olds as equal, all 40-year-olds as equal. But we know practically, right? You line a bunch of 30-year-olds up and you can see, right, how people have lived their life at different paces, right? And they're going to be aging at different rates. That is true of our hair cells, our skin cells, and our egg cells, right? And our sperm cells. And so we want to treat, so there's a difference between chronological age in years, and biological age, meaning the vitality of our cells. And so it is very reductionistic to just assume that because someone is, say, 35 years old, they're all of a sudden going to have trouble conceiving, right?
Yeah.
And
How are you 34 and you're fine, and then 35 you're
yes,
geriatric? I don't understand that.
exactly. And so this idea of a cliff, it's just so overstated, and the language around it, geriatric, I mean, like that needs a rebrand. Like,
Yeah.
please no, like just stop the insanity, right? And so and maybe for you at 35, yes, that is true, but maybe for someone else at 25, right? And this is why I think testing can be really helpful, because we can actually see what's going on physiologically for you instead of looking at these random data tables that talk about some average person. And especially if you happen to be getting pregnant later in life, I think it's even more important to understand what's going on for you, so you don't waste time on stuff for the average protocol. You just focus on the things that are relevant for you.
Right. Alexandria, you've mentioned a couple of times testing. Tell us more about this testing, what all of that entails, what people can expect, all of that.
So we were talking about earlier this concept of pre-pregnancy wellness. And so when I'm talking about testing, I'm talking about testing those 5 categories of pre-pregnancy wellness. We do it at the company that I founded, Poplin. And the idea is really just to get a sense. We look at 70 biomarkers. So it's a really broad test. And the idea is just to flag anything that we know that could potentially interfere with ability to get pregnant or the health of a future pregnancy. And so we're looking at things like nutrient deficiencies, thyroid dysfunction, presence, indicators of potential autoimmune conditions, inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, all the things that we know can interfere in one way or another with a regular menstrual cycle, with egg development, sperm development, those sorts of things.
So is this a blood test, a sperm test, urine test? Like, what are the tests? All of them?
It's blood and urine.
Okay.
And yes, I mean, there's adjunctive tests that you can do with it. So I think of it as like your first line of defense, which is, okay, I want to know what I'm working with, right? Today, fertility is a black box until you try. And it's, let's throw some stuff at the wall, see if it sticks, right? And if it does, what you were saying earlier, sometimes it does. And like, great, amazing.
Yes.
And increasingly it doesn't. And so if you want your fertility not to be a black box anymore, and you don't want to wait until you're trying to find out that there is an issue, we can screen for things that we know could potentially be issues. Is it going to catch 100% of things? No, that's not the goal. The goal is to understand the major risk factors for challenges. Do you have any of those present? And can we start to address them? And I mean, I've never had a test come back with nothing. It's just with that many, like it's never happened. But I've also never had anyone say, I wish I didn't have that information. Even if it does come back with, things that they need to work on, right? Because at least there's a path to doing something.
Right. Oh, yeah. More information, never a bad thing. Learning about your body and your health, never a bad thing. So thank you for explaining that to us, because I was like, I'm sure our listeners are like, what is this test? Where do I get this test? Do I just go to my local CVS? Like, what is this?
I wish.
But I guess, and I mentioned this earlier, not just first-time parents, second-time parents, but I want to confirm with you, like, does the importance of pre-pregnancy health only apply to first-time parents? Or is this like, after, like, for example, I'll share a little of my story. With my first pregnancy, I was very lucky and blessed. I'm sorry for those of you who are listening that have had a different story. I tried once with my husband and got pregnant. And I feel so grateful. And I knew, having been in the birthing world for as many years as I have, I knew that was such a blessing. My daughter was a different story. And I didn't struggle for as long as some people, so I am not trying to compare myself to anyone else, but it did take us 8 months. And that's not a short amount of time. And I know it's not an extremely long amount of time either, but every month is heartbreaking when you're wanting a positive pregnancy test, and when that period comes, you just are devastated. So we need to know, does the importance of pre-pregnancy health only apply to that first time, or can we do something for subsequent pregnancies?
Super important question. No, it is not only relevant for a first-time pregnancy. It is relevant whether it's a first pregnancy or a fifth pregnancy. It is relevant whether you are 23 or 43. And the reason for this is because your health matters every time you get pregnant. And what we now understand is that your health is actually what is setting the stage for the lifelong trajectory of health for your child through epigenetic markers in egg and sperm. So that is what you are transmitting to your child. And what you are doing in the 3, 6, 12-ish months prior to conception is what's setting the stage for those epigenetics that are then going to be passed on to your child. And if we think about a second pregnancy or a third pregnancy, oftentimes your health may be a little bit more compromised than they were with a first pregnancy, right? Because if you think about pregnancy, delivery, running around after a baby, whether breastfeeding is, oftentimes, right, pregnancy is the most nutrient intensive time in a female's entire life. And so it can be incredibly, incredibly demanding on the body. And we don't do a wonderful job of repleting after pregnancy in general as a culture, right? So hormones may be dysregulated, nutrients may be depleted. And so, for second pregnancies, it can be, sometimes, I don't want to say even more important, but certainly as important to do the screening to make sure that you're in the health, the level of health to conceive, and certainly the level of health that you want to pass on to your children.
Thank you so much for answering that, because I'm sure people are like, okay, I'm interested in having my third, fourth, whatever baby. Do I need to take this seriously? Maybe I struggled before, maybe I didn't. So this is for all the families out there who are wanting to potentially add on to their family. So, but let's talk about optimizing all of this. Like, what can we do? How can pre-pregnancy health be optimized?
So I think we'll split it into two major categories. One is the micro, and we've talked a bit about that, and then the other is the macro. So the micro is, understanding your pre-pregnancy wellness baseline, understanding your own health history, and there is such a thing called a preconception visit, which I would encourage everyone to go to their providers and ask for. And
Wow.
yep. And there you can review your family health history, your personal health history, any chronic conditions you have, any medications to make sure they're fertility and pregnancy safe. All of these things are things that are part of a preconception visit. And so with your blood testing and your preconception visit, you have a really good understanding of what your status is prior to conceiving and potentially areas of improvement. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it, but it's there for you if you so choose, right? And then there's the macro factors, which, certainly interact, but I think these are the things that I generally see at a macro level that are going on that are fertility blockers, basically. Mm-hmm. So I think the first is that we often are, as a culture, eating less food and more food-like substances. And what happens in that case is our bodies think we are starving because we're getting adequate calories, but insufficient micronutrients. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so our bodies think that we're in a famine, if we think evolutionarily, right? Okay. And when there's a famine, your body downregulates reproductive function. So I think it's really important to just understand like the physiology side of this, because then we could say, okay, well, right, nutrient density is the name of the game, certainly in pregnancy. But as you were pointing out earlier, right, act as if you're already pregnant in that preconception window as well. So optimizing nutrient density over calorie density and really, optimizing for a broad array of different types of nutrients. That's the first one.
This is great. This is good stuff because, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you could even do a preconception thing. And I should know that. But I didn't. So this is gold, Alexandria. I love this. Oh man, you're shedding so much great knowledge. And we talked about this, we talked about how pre-pregnancy wellness does not only apply to females. This is for partners as well. How can partners support each other in achieving pre-pregnancy wellness goals?
So I would say the first thing is, if it's the female reproductive partner who's listening to this right now, I would invite you to invite your male reproductive partner, if that is the partner that you have, into this conversation, right? And I think a lot of times males are just being completely left out of this conversation, and they oftentimes want to contribute. They just don't know what the heck to do. And so, I think biology does not care about our cultural construct that fertility is a female problem. Like, newsflash, right? It's a 50-50 biological equation. So we put all this burden on, our shoulders, and we do all like the back flips and I'll take this and I'll do that, right? You're optimizing only 50% of the equation. Just mathematically, if we just simplify it, that is not going to get you the best outcomes. So I think it's really important to be inviting your male reproductive partner into this conversation and understanding that he is a really important part of this equation. And a lot of the things that you're going to be doing to optimize your fertility are the same things that he can be doing. And it's so much easier even if we just think about what we were just talking about, nutrition. If you're going to be upgrading what's going on, what's in your refrigerator and in your pantry, that you have someone else who's aligned to it as well and on board. If you're going to be upgrading your personal care products and your home care products, and that you have someone else who's on board with you as well, because that could be a whole trial. So I think that's the thing I would say is, if you are going to be parenting together, I really encourage people to be preparing together and to really change the dialogue around this entire thing. Because really your partner's most important physiological contribution, I'm not going to say their most important contribution, but physiological contribution happens at the point of conception. It is literally their one shot to contribute to the health future of your child at that point. So what they're doing in that prior year really, really matters. And, certainly they're playing other roles, of course, emotionally, spiritually in these later stages. But if we're talking purely physiologically, that is the point at which they are giving input into this process. And then, of course, you are, carrying the pregnancy, and then you're giving input at different stages. I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, it's obvious, but you don't really think about it like that. And then so realizing, and I love how you put that. If you're going to parent together, prepare together. I love this. I was like, yes, preach, Alexandria. I love it. So, and let's talk about. I mean, we've talked about really the physical health
Mm,
with all of this, but how does mental health factor into pre-pregnancy wellness?
mm. This is a big one. I think because of a lot of the things that we've been talking about is I think there's a lot of negative messaging that has been
Mm-hmm.
going to females around fertility. And I also think that we just focus so much on the downside. All the stories are all the things that can go wrong, not about the things that can go well. So I think we just have this huge negative bias in when it comes to fertility. So it scares people. And so, what I'm seeing is that reproductive anxiety is on the rise. So the way I talk is just people's concern about their ability to get pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy and baby. And oftentimes anxiety is resulting from the gap between the importance of something and the control we feel we have over something. So getting pregnant is high importance, but we've been told it's low control, meaning
Right.
we can't do very much about it.
Right.
And so, my message to people, I hope, is there's a lot that you can do to influence this. And so this story that you just have to cross your fingers and hope is not true anymore. There's a lot more that you can do. Can we control it? No, but I feel like that's the first lesson in parenting is let that go. So right, we manage the variables that we can manage, and then we surrender to the rest. But when I think about the mental health piece in general, one thing that I think is just important for people to understand, and I'm huge into the physiology, so you'll have to excuse me because I think it just really helps, is that your body will always prioritize survival over procreation. And the way that we see that happen is because your sex hormones and your stress hormones are in the same biochemical pathway. So if your body is consistently stressed out, whether that's because of a physiological stressor like mold in the house or an infection that you're not aware of, or psychological stress, I don't like my job, I don't like where I live, your body will divert resources from making your sex hormones to making your stress hormones. And your body literally doesn't have the raw materials to sustain a cycle, never mind a pregnancy. And so this is why when people are trying to conceive and people say, oh, relax, it's the most insulting piece of advice.
Yes. Yes.
And there is also physiology behind it. And so I think it's just important to know that feeling stressed can be challenging when it comes to getting pregnant, but feeling stressed about feeling stressed also really challenging, right? So it's
Yes.
this intense feedback loop. So what I generally tell people is the goal is not to not have any stress. It's really the chronic stressors that are problematic. Our body, we were designed to deal with acute stress, like the proverbial running from a lion. So if you have a big presentation at work and you have to give that and you're, stressed about that, but then it dissipates, that's fine. It's the low level, all day, everyday things that we either want to eliminate if we can eliminate it, or change our relationship to if we can't eliminate it, right? Sometimes you can't leave your job, but maybe you find ways to put playlists on. Maybe you find ways to upgrade your desk area. Maybe whatever it is to upgrade the experience so that it feels a little bit better to you.
Thank you so much for touching on mental health, because I really do think that it's now being discussed more and people are getting more support, but I feel like we are just a far away from what we really need to support people in general, but especially when you're trying to start a family. So thank you for covering that aspect of our pre-pregnancy wellness. And now I need to know, Alexandria, what lifestyle habits should prospective parents consider adjusting or adopting?
Mm. So I think one that I encourage people to think about as early as possible. Although if you're thinking about a subsequent pregnancy and you haven't made these changes, it's a great time as well. It's to really think about the products that you use, and the preponderance of environmental chemicals in our air, water, personal care products, home care products, and food. And so it can take some time to start to eliminate things that are problematic. So there's a whole class of chemicals that are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, which do exactly what they sound like, which is they disrupt our endocrine systems, meaning a lot of our hormones. And the last thing we need when we're trying to get pregnant is an external source of synthetic hormones, right? That's
Right.
not going to help us. And the problem is that there's tens of thousands of these chemicals. Many of them have, only been recently introduced, and we're just being bombarded with them all day, every day. And so it can take some time and attention to systematically remove as many of these as possible. Are we ever going to get rid of all of them? No, it's not possible. So, and you're going to be in environments where it's not controlled. So, as much as you can manage them in your own home and the environments that you spend the most time in, the better off you will be. And it can take some time. I mean, like finding a deodorant, finding shampoo and conditioner that like works for you and works for the people around you because it actually works. Like it can take some time. So, giving yourself a little bit of grace as you go through that process, and slowly but surely eliminating these things from your environment, I think is one of the bigger factors that I encourage people to think about.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I think also a lot of people are like, okay, yes, detoxing, which we had Sophia Ruan Goucher on our podcast, and she talked all about the A to Z to detoxing your home, and for especially people are thinking about that when having babies. But I think that we get so like, oh my gosh, but there's so many things with the cleaning products, the beauty products. I mean, even the air in our house, like there's so many different things to consider. But just taking it one at a time and making little adjustments, that way you can make some big steps. So I appreciate you bringing that up, that it can be done, but just taking it step by step.
For sure. And this is why giving yourself a little bit more time is helpful, because if you try to crunch this all, then it can feel really overwhelming. And you can do some of these things in a lower cost way, like swapping products out. And some things require a little bit more of an investment. So that maybe that's air filters or water filters and shower filters, by the way. Everyone always forgets about the shower filters.
Brilliant. So, yes, because that is just for scalp health and your hair health. Like, yes, we should have shower filters. Brilliant.
So, being able to budget for those things or plan for those things, it can be helpful to give yourself a little bit of more runway.
Perfect. Is there any other lifestyle habit that you think that we need to take into consideration as well?
I think the only other one that I would add that we haven't talked about, because we talked about nutrition a bit, is movement. And I don't actually mean exercise, although wonderful if you want to include that, right? I think that there's a Goldilocks principle with hormones. There's a Goldilocks principle in general, which is not too much, not too little, right in the middle. And so the same thing applies to exercise, is that if we over-exercise, then a lot of times cycles can go away. And if we under-exercise, then we have a lot of stagnation, and that can cause a whole host of issues. And so what I would encourage people to think about is that, especially, and I am guilty of this too, right? Because I'm working at my desk a lot of the day and we're sitting. And if you think about it, when you're sitting, you literally compress your reproductive organs. And this is true of males and females. And so when you compress that area, what happens is you don't get as effective of a flow of oxygen and nutrients. So all the good stuff that you're putting in your body doesn't actually get circulated as well as it could. So making sure that you're standing up and moving can minimize the probability of things stagnating and maybe even adhesions and things like that. And so making sure that you're moving. And I think for males too, this is particularly important, because again, when you're sitting for long periods of time, that creates heat. And we do not love excess heat around testicles, right? That's not great for sperm quality. So just getting up, moving on a regular cadence, I think can be helpful when we think about trying to encourage blood flow to all of our organs, particularly our reproductive organs.
Yeah. I mean, walking does wonders. Like, I love that. Just movement. Yes. Yes. These are great. Just it's funny. It's like basic things, but really they can make such a difference if you do them for an extended period of time. Not like, okay, this week I'm going to do this and then stop, but really making these life changes of, I'm going to choose something that's non-toxic. I'm going to look at these ingredients before making this purchase. I'm going to actually, you know what? I'm feeling really stressed. Rather than binge watching a show, I'm going to go for a walk outside and listen to this podcast. There are so many things we get triggers. And when you're triggered by something, it's the habit that we are just naturally accustomed to, that we go to, but really making an effort to change that habit. So when we experience that trigger, we go to something else. So these are wonderful lifestyle habits and tips that you've shared with us, Alexandria, is so, so good. So how does the level of pre-pregnancy wellness have an impact on postpartum recovery? Because that's, I think more people are talking about postpartum recovery, which yay, we need to. But yeah, we need to know the level of pre-pregnancy wellness. How does it impact our postpartum recovery?
Oh, so there's a lot here, and there's still so much we don't know. We're
Totally.
still just scratching the surface. But what I see is it often there's knock-on effects. So kind of what's happening in preconception moves over into pregnancy, and then what's happening in pregnancy moves over into postpartum. And so all of these periods, and then early childhood development. So one of the more profound things that we see is that nutrient deficiencies in preconception can affect postpartum, and in particular postpartum depression. Right. So we see studies that say low maternal status with regards to vitamin D and omega 3s, right, as an example, is associated with a higher risk of postpartum mood disorders. Right. And so if we just take that alone, knowing that if you go into pregnancy in a depleted state, it is likely to create challenges certainly in pregnancy, but then also in postpartum, because it's so hard for your body to catch up because the nutrient needs increase so much and so rapidly that it can be really, really hard for your body to replete, even if you are taking supplementation. So I think that's just important to understand that all of these stages affect one another, and the more we can really, really over-index on this preconception period, the better the knock-on effects in the pregnancy period and the postpartum period.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. It's all intertwined. We need to keep that in mind as we enter into, okay, if I'm wanting to start a family, this is a crucial time to make some big decisions, because this is going to set up the rest of my pregnancy, birthing, postpartum recovery experience. I say that all the time. I say that when you are preparing for birth, if you are more knowledgeable and feel empowered, you are going to bring that to your labor. The better experience and less trauma you experience, the better postpartum recovery you will have, the less chances you may experience postpartum anxiety or depression. And so by preparing to change life habits right now and taking care of your health and educating yourself on all of these different things really can set you up for such a better place in the future. So I love that. Thank you, Alexandria.
Yeah, it's a period of very high dividends.
It
I
is.
like what you said.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. So for people, just to wrap us up on this, like your top tips for pre-pregnancy wellness, what are they?
Mm. I think what I would say is, first to take agency back in this process and to really educate yourself on what variables matter when it comes to pre-pregnancy wellness, to understand what pre-pregnancy wellness is, and to figure out what your pre-pregnancy wellness status is. I think that's, I'm obviously hugely biased, so everyone should take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, for sure. But I really do believe in, understanding where you are, and you can use your cycle as a barometer for what's going on with your health. You can use testing as a barometer, right? You can sometimes use symptoms, but as we discussed, like they're not always a leading indicator. They tend to be a lagging indicator. So I would say that. And I think this, idea of act as if you are already pregnant is a good mantra when we think about the types of lifestyle changes that we want to think about in the pre-pregnancy window. So if you're going to be making, like a lot of times people will reduce caffeine, they will reduce alcohol, they will try to eat more nutrient dense foods, right? First trimester, I know is, can throw a wrench in things.
I can just stay yes. down and not throw back up. That'd be great.
Yep. Exactly. And I think that's even more of a reason, right, to do this stuff in the preconception window, is because unexpected things happen and you may not be able to eat as pristinely, quote unquote, as you would have hoped in first trimester. So you have a buffer. So, I think this act as if already pregnant is another really important thing when we think about movement and nutrition and stress management, all of those things. And then I think the last one we already said, but I would like to reiterate it, which is that pre-pregnancy wellness involves both reproductive partners. And that's, kind of regardless of what your relationship construct is. So I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind.
Fantastic tips. So, so good. All right. Now, what resources do you recommend to individuals looking to learn more about preconception health?
Mm. Well, I would say that I wrote a whole book on it. So I think that's a pretty good resource.
Yes.
Again, I'm biased on this, but I wrote it purposely because there wasn't something out there that was kind of like the modern guide to preparing to get pregnant. It's called 9 Months is Not Enough, the ultimate pre-pregnancy checklist to create a baby-ready body and build generational health. And like, I'm a relatively type A individual. I like me a checklist. I think it's, I think it's helpful, right? And I think it allows for this balance because I think there's the structure and the surrender of this entire process. Mm-hmm. And so this book is about the structure side of it. Is what are all the things that you can do to understand the factors at play and to try to optimize, right? Can we get, as I've said a couple of times, like, can we get everything right? And can we do all the things? Like, no, and that's not the goal. But, can we manage most of these things as best as we can? Yes, we absolutely can. So I think that's a really good starting point for folks who want to understand more. And I talk about the preconception visit in there. I talk about the testing a bit more. I talk about all these fertility blockers in a lot more detail. And there's resources as well.
Fantastic. Oh, so good. All right. Alexandria, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Oh gosh. I mean, they're just in such good hands with you and this community. I'm, inspired by this conversation, and it's really, really cool to be talking about preconception and to be rewriting this dialogue. So I think I would just say to all of you, this is a message of hope, that there's just so much opportunity out there to chart your own path when it comes to whether it's a first pregnancy or a third pregnancy, and for you to really take agency over your own health. And this is a great place to start.
Love it. So, so good. Oh my gosh. Alexandria, thank you so much for being here, for your time, and for sharing all of these amazing tips and just your knowledge. It's impressive and so, so helpful. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, good. And for our listeners out there to learn more about Alexandria, you can find her online at the number 9monthsisnotenough. So 9monthsisnotenough.com or on Instagram at getpoplin. Our team will be posting today's episode on our Baby Chick Facebook and Instagram page at the Baby Chick Chat. So if you have any questions or comments about our discussion, please share them within the comments section. And as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to Chick Chat, the Baby Chick podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave us a review. Cheers to prioritizing your pre-pregnancy wellness.